last section is section 7.9. We did skip a couple of sections in chapter 7 because we just can't cover everything. So when we are going through 7, I picked out the highlights. You got the understanding of what an array is. You looked at passing as an argument an array. You looked at a method that has a return type that's array. And today we're going to look at the last thing. It's called a two-dimensional array. And then for those of you moving on in other courses, you'll see where this will come up once in a while. So it's not a flash in the pan. It's something that will continue. So two-dimensional array, and the best way that I can tell you to visualize this is like a matrix. And a matrix that might have 3 rows by 3 columns. And in our computer science world, we know that it's not going to be 1, 2, 3. It's going to be 0, 1, and 2. So if you think of a matrix with 3 rows and 3 columns, you have the basic idea of what a two-dimensional array is going to look like. Another really good example might be a spreadsheet and how you fill in blocks within a spreadsheet. And you're able to store lots and lots of information. Difference with the spreadsheet is you can put different values in those cells. But as you know, when we work with arrays, we have to have a homogeneous data type, meaning they all have to be the same. So if I start thinking about a two-dimensional array and I go with rows and columns, and I remember columns hold up a building, so they're the ones that are vertical, they go up and down. And you know, I could start to fill in from left to right what might be an array, and you know, it would be row 0, column 1, and I could put in the number 4 to store there. Row 0, excuse me, column 0, I could put in a 4. Row 0, column 1. So I could go through this whole 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2. And that's going to be 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2. Then I would move to the next row, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2. And finally to the last row, 2, 0, 2, 1, and 2, 2. And hopefully when I start writing some of those numbers, you're going to see a pattern developing here and start to think about a way, how could I do something like search through this, or basically traverse through a two-dimensional array? Well, we're going to first of all take a look at what the definition or the syntax is for a two-dimensional array. Just like we talked about with arrays, I'm going to start with my data type, double, square bracket, but now I'm going to have a second square bracket. Scores is the name of the two-dimensional array. It's going to be the address again, equals new double square bracket. Now I'm going to put the size in, 3 and 3. 3 in the first square bracket, 3 in the second square bracket. There is another language, and I forget off the top of my head, but it only has 1 set of square brackets, and inside it would be 3, 3, and then a right square bracket. But for Java, we need 2 sets of square brackets. Same with C++ for those of you that are moving on. Well, I start to go back to this pattern of what I looked at when I was traversing through this two-dimensional array. And I said, well, I'm going to start with row being 0, and column is going to get the value of 0, 1, and 2. Then row is going to be 1, and column is going to get the value of 0, 1, and 2, and on for the next one. And the way I can represent this is with nested for loops. And you notice I'm going to even use the variable names row and column instead of counter 1 and counter 2, or a common one is I and J. Does anybody know why you've seen some for loops that use I equals 0, I less than 10, I plus plus? Have you seen it? Kyle, what do you got? Mohammed, what do you got?
Is I short for index?
Yes, it is. Very good. And a lot of times what's inside of the square brackets that we call subscripts, some people will call index. So you might see for I equals 0 for the outer loop and for j equals 0 for the inner loop. All right, so I have a nested for loop. I have for row equals 0, row less than 3, row plus plus. Inside of that, I have for column equals 0, column less than 3, column plus plus. Now, if I was to hand trace this, the first line I would hit is row. So what I mean by hand trace is I'm going to write the variable row, and I'm going to give it the value of 0. When I move to my next line, I'm inside of a loop, and this is the column for loop. It's nested. It's my inner loop. Column is going to get the value of 0. Row doesn't change when it comes back up. It stays at 0. Column gets the value of 1. It stays inside of here. Row stays at 0. And column gets the value of 2. I've now completed my inner for loop, and my next line would say, oh, go back up to my outer for loop. This time it gets incremented, and row would get the value of 1. Then column would go 0. We'd run through that whole inner loop again of column getting the value of 0s, 1, and 2. Back up to my outer loop. 0, row would be 2, column 0, and column 1, and column 2, and finally I'm done. So these two nested for loops mean this body is going to run 9 times. And inside of this body, I'm going to have values of row and column that I could use. And how could I use them? Well, I could use something like system dot out dot println. And of course, we know we don't like doing this, but system.out.println is a great debugging tool. And then what would be inside of this println? Scores, square bracket row, square bracket column. That would be a way for me to traverse through my two-dimensional array, displaying all of the elements that are stored in the array. Now, we might want to tweak this, because when I do this, I'd be putting them side by side. In fact, all 9 of them would be side by side. I might want to put spacing in, but I also might want to put in, well, let's see, I would want to change println to just print right now so that they go side by side. Then when I come out of my for loop, hint, hint, I might want to put a println before I go to my outer loop so that it would put a carriage return in. And you're going to see the need for that in a little bit when we get to our programming example. Once again, we have the idea of implicit initialization. Int, square bracket, square bracket, square bracket, square bracket. Numbers equals. Just like before, I'm going to use set notation, and I'm going to put all of the elements in. But each element is going to be its own little set notation. So I'm going to have a right brace, 1, 2, 3, excuse me, back up, beep, beep, left brace to start. Then left brace, 1, 2, 3, right brace, comma. So that would fill in my first row. Left brace, 4, 5, 6, right brace, comma. That filled in the next row. Left brace, 7, 8, 9, right brace, and done. So this would create the dimensions for me. I would know this would become a 3 by 3 matrix. Questions? Okay. Now I want you to go to D2L. I'm going to see if I can get to it. I didn't have it queued up. But if I go here, it's at the Zoom meeting, and I'm trying to get into D2L. Can you see my screen? No, Amy. What do I have here? I have a main for you to write to do two-dimensional arrays. Public static void main string args, blah, 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 blah. String input. All right, that's going to be somewhere I'll use that. I don't see it in my code. I don't even need it. But I have declaration for 3 matrices. Int, square bracket, blah, 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 matrix A, size 3 by 3. Matrix B, size 3 by 3. And matrix mat sum is also 3 by 3. So I have declaration for 3 arrays. Now it looks like I have a method called fill. And fill is going to fill those arrays with random numbers from 1 to 10 inclusively. Then I'm going to reuse fill, and I'm going to fill a second matrix. I'll fill matrix B, mat B. Then I'm going to have a method called print, which will display matrix A, print, which will display matrix B. So those will be my arguments being passed into print. Then I have a method called add mat, which will add my matrices. My arguments will be mat A for matrix A, mat B, and mat sum. And then I'll display the sum. So I'm giving you the main. I have 3 methods that you will need to write: fill, print, and add matrix. And you see, yeah, this is kind of good because I'm using print 3 different times. I'm using fill twice. Questions?